And welcome and thanks for coming. I'm Doug Trump, Executive Director of the Urbanist, and we're so grateful that Lorena could join, Gonzlez could join us. And it's a very busy time, and she has the forum with the Mass Coalition next week, and our candidate interviews are this weekend. So we're getting to see a lot of Council President Gonzalez this week, and we appreciate her making time in her busy schedule. And to everyone out there who likes what you read, thank you for reading it. And at the Urbanist, and if you'd like to contribute or edit or volunteer anyway, feel free to reach out to me at doug@theurbanist.org. We're also would love to have your support financially too, if you're trying to.
Pretty good.
But I will pass it back to Patrick to do the full introduction for the Council President.
All right, tonight we're very excited to be joined by Council President and mayoral candidate Lorena González. The daughter of farm workers, Lorena worked her way through community college, earned a business degree at WSU, and then earned a law degree from Seattle University. She went to work as a civil rights attorney, fighting for the rights of workers, victims of wage theft, employment discrimination, and victims of police misconduct and sexual abuse. She's currently the president of the Seattle City Council and campaigning to be our next mayor. Before I hand it over to you, I also want to acknowledge that you've had some personal tragedy lately, and that we here at the Urbanist have been thinking about you and your family, and want to express our wishes that you're doing well and know that you're in our hearts. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Patrick and Doug and everybody else for having me. And thanks for that acknowledgement. It means a lot to me and my family. Good news is we finally found some housing for the next 9 to 12 months, which is about how long it's going to take for our condo building to be repaired. So feeling like stability is around the corner for us, but have certainly gotten launched into sort of all of the issues related to how difficult it is to be a renter in the city. And, for us in particular, having not expected to be suddenly houseless, it has been quite the experience for us. And so I'm really happy to be here with all of you tonight to talk about many of the issues that I think of our shared interest. And our values aligned. And so, Patrick, you already sort of gave my bio, so I'll skip over my bio and just really talk about how big of a fan I am of the Urbanist and the work that you all do, and your perspective on many of the issues that the city as a whole is asked to consider frequently. Everything from the wonkiness and the in the details weeds of land use policy to talking about racial justice and what racial justice means when you're an urbanist. And I think that those are really important reframings of the conversation when we're talking about urbanism and when we're talking about really at the core who we're building a city for, not just what kind of city we're building, but for whom are we building a city. Is something that is really has been the center stone of and the cornerstone of the work that I've been doing as a pro-urbanist council member. And it's how I want to lead as a mayoral candidate and as mayor if I'm lucky enough to be elected. I want to build a city that is accessible and affordable to all. And that means making sure that we have affordable public transit. It means making sure we have affordable childcare. It means making sure that we are eliminating our exclusionary zoning laws that have kept people out, people of color in particular, out of particular wealthy white neighborhoods throughout the city of Seattle. And these are all going to be really significant challenges. I think you're going to hear a lot of alignment on many of these policies amongst some of the candidates. But I think that the difference that I bring is that when these issues like getting rid of exclusionary zoning weren't as popular and mainstream, I was here talking about why exclusionary zoning needed to be eliminated. We are now in a point in our history in the city where we can actually effectuate that. We can actually bring that to fruition. And that really excites me to have an opportunity to be able to build a coalition and a campaign together with racial justice advocates, housing advocates to get policies, big, bold policies like that across the finish line. So I'm going to leave it there and give it back to you all, because I know we're going to engage in some Q&A, and I'm excited about the opportunity to just have a conversation about what's at the top of your mind.
Great. Well, thanks. So I think I speak for many of us when I say that one of our current mayor's failings is a lack of big vision. So what would your vision be for the city? And then looking back in 4 or voters willing 8 years, what specifically are the main things you would have hoped to have accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I kind of alluded to it a little bit. I mean, my vision really is, building a 15-minute, city, a city where you can live anywhere in any neighborhood across the city and find things within a 15-minute walk shed of where you currently live. And I think that the reason that is my vision is because I think if we build that kind of city and build towards that kind of city, it means that we will have dealt with underlying issues of income inequality, of racially based exclusion from certain neighborhoods and income based exclusion from certain neighborhoods. And it also means that we will have addressed the issues related to people who continue to experience homelessness in our city. And so for me, my vision is really around how do we build that vibrant, interconnected, livable city where we are prioritizing our public rights of way and our public realm in a way that really focuses on those who are going to be most subjected to harm if we don't build an infrastructure in a way that protects them. So pedestrians and cyclists, for example, are an important priority, have been an important priority for me, and will continue to be a really important priority for me if elected mayor.
Great, thank you. So I think one of the things that unites many urbanist issues is climate change. And it seems like our state and national government have failed to act adequately to respond to it. What actions do you think the city should take? And how do you think it can have an influence on our larger region and state?
Yeah, I mean, I think mayors play a really important role in building coalitions of other local mayors across the city and across the world, frankly. And there are those coalitions. I would want to continue to participate in those kinds of coalitions that work on climate change from a local level. That's one issue. The second is that for me, when I think about issues related to climate change, I really do think about it from the perspective of having grown up as a migrant farm worker who was subjected to pesticides and whose literal livelihood growing up was dependent on the weather. Our gains, our income earned from the cherry crop and the cherry season very much depended on whether or not it rained at the wrong time and spoiled a bunch of the harvest, and therefore impacted our ability to earn more as migrant farm workers. And so when I think about these issues, I really do center the frontline communities who have been most disproportionately impacted by our failure to take clear and decisive action as it relates to climate change. So for example, we know that folks who live near the Duwamish Valley, folks who live in South Park live on average 8 years less than people who live in Laurelhurst. And there's a direct correlation there between the environment in which we have built and allowed to be built in poor communities on the south end versus rich, wealthy communities on the north end of the cut. And so I think for me, what's really important is making sure that we're talking about housing as infrastructure, and that it's infrastructure that is specifically designed, public infrastructure that is specifically designed to reduce carbon emissions. If we create more dense neighborhoods, we give people less reason to get in their car and to drive to work and to drive to their childcare and to drive to their grocery stores. And we can build that kind of city if we're serious about radically reforming and transforming our exclusionary zoning laws as they currently exist. So density is really important to me. Second thing, obviously, is public transit, making it more affordable, more accessible. It's a shame that it takes an hour and a half to get from Capitol Hill to Ballard on a good day. And you know, when we're talking about issues like the West Seattle Bridge, that is really important regional infrastructure, we also have an opportunity to reimagine what we say when we talk about bridges to allow for non-single occupancy vehicle travel on the West Seattle Bridge as well. I mean, we currently have that on the lower bridge, but I'm using that as sort of an example of, in the context of the conversation around bridge maintenance, making sure that we are not just sort of talking about rebuilding the thing that currently exists, but reimagining what it is to allow for multimodal use. So that is also a really important issue for me. And then the last thing I'll say is buildings. A lot of people don't understand and appreciate that within the city of Seattle, the second largest contributor to carbon emissions are commercial buildings. And so I think that there is an opportunity for us to ramp up our green buildings programs through the Office of Sustainability and Environment to really begin to make a huge difference in terms of the level of emissions that are being created by our commercial buildings across the city.
Thanks. I think you've sort of touched on this. One of the biggest land issues the next mayor will have to navigate is the comprehensive plan update starting next year. The last time it happened, all the options to accommodate growth were variations of basically the status quo urban village strategy. What will your approach be to the comprehensive plan update in 2024? And how will you create needed change investment in both social housing and missing middle housing?
Yeah, I mean, I have touched on this a little bit. I mean, I think one, we have to make sure that we lead with race and social justice in terms of a filter and a layer of what we want the comprehensive plan to produce. And then secondly, I live in an urban village. I have lived in an urban village for many years. I think we need to stay committed to an urban village model. But I also think that the entire city needs to be modeled after an urban village. And I think we have an opportunity to do that in a comprehensive plan by making it really clear that apartments and other types of dense housing, multifamily housing, will no longer be illegal in single family home zones. I think the way we do that is I'm an organizer at heart. So the way that I would want to do that is to build a strong coalition of housing affordability advocates, of climate advocates, climate justice advocates, and of other folks who are interested in making sure that we have a true urban vibrant city to come together and advise me and partners on the city council to set the vision and create a work plan and move it forward. That's what it's going to take to get this done, is somebody who's going to prioritize that work.
Great. So you mentioned like changing single family zoning and paying apartments. I know there's been a lot of talk about it. And it means different things to different people, from just duplexes to 4 floors in a corner store. When you talk about opening up single family zoning to other types of housing, what's your vision for that? What's your thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the broadest sense possible. I mean, I think part and parcel the reason that we continue to have people experiencing housing instability and homelessness is because we haven't produced enough affordable housing choice throughout the city. And so I would construe it in the most liberal sense. It is sort of not just middle housing, but all kinds of forms of mixed housing choices throughout every part of the city that allows people an opportunity, regardless of your income, of actually being able to choose to live in a neighborhood that suits you. And if you have a family, suits you and your family.
Great. So on a related note, Seattle's been growing so rapidly, and this led to a lot of gentrification and displacement. As we talk about adding more housing and creating more options, we also want to address people being forced out of our city, and people in many cases being forced onto the street. It's been talked about a lot, but it seems like we have not stemmed the flow. How would you try to help people who cannot keep up with the cost of housing in our city?
Well, I mean, I think that the next mayor is going to have an opportunity to re-envision and take a second look at housing affordability levy, which has been widely supported and broadly supported. And I think there's an opportunity there to create greater homeownership opportunities, not just of single family homes, but of condos and townhomes and whatnot. And I also think that part of the reason that the market rate price of housing is so inaffordable is because we only allow alternative housing choices that may cost less than a single family home at $850,000. We only allow those to be built in certain parts of the city. If we allow housing choice to be developed in other parts of the city that are outside of the footprint of an urban village, then I believe that we will give some relief to those market pressures that create sort of inflated home prices, and that really sort of cost people out. But that's sort of more of a supply kind of issue. The reality is that the folks who are being gentrified out of our city are people of color, single moms, and those who make less income. So fundamentally, gentrification is about income inequality. And we have an opportunity to, as we look at coming out of the COVID crisis, really thinking about what an economic recovery looks like and who we are prioritizing in investments for an equitable economic recovery in our city. And that means, investing in our local economy and making sure that we have opportunities for people to engage in entrepreneurship opportunities, to break the cycles of poverty and to allow people a path to have economic resiliency and to continue being part of our city. It's critically important to address the issues of income inequality, particularly for BIPOC folks and for working families who just are really having a hard time making ends meet with two incomes in a home.
Thank you. So staying on housing, like you're a special guest.
Yeah, she always likes to make an appearance.
So homelessness is one of the biggest issues that our city is facing, and we know the solution to homelessness is housing. It's just people need housing, but how do we get to the point where we have enough affordable housing so that no one is suffering on our streets, and how do we provide a short-term solution to get people into safe and healthy situations in the meantime? Because even if we had the money, it would take years to provide enough housing.
Yeah, I mean, there's no short-term solution to the issues facing those experiencing homelessness, and part of the reason is because these are legacies. The reason people are experiencing homelessness or enter into an experience of homelessness are multifaceted and incredibly complicated because they are human experiences. They are also a product of systemic failures, of the fact that we as a society, from the federal government on down, have made intentional policy choices that exclude people who are experiencing homelessness. And the reality is that when you dig into the details of who is experiencing homelessness in King County, it is disproportionately BIPOC members of our community. So we have to get at the root causes of what is causing folks to experience homelessness. That's income inequality, a failure to invest in our mental and behavioral health system, a criminalization of being poor and or of being having a substance use disorder. These are all things that are designed by the system to make it more challenging for people to ever exit from an experience of homelessness once they have entered. And so we have to address those systemic issues in order to be able to really make a difference here. Because you're right, it's going to take us years to build the amount of housing that we need for the near 12,000 people in King County who are currently experiencing homelessness. And it's also going to take us not as much time, but it will take us time to also stand up and bring to scale our emergency shelter crisis system. And I have been doing both of those things, consistently increasing investments in our emergency shelter system and in our affordable housing investments, both in permanent supportive housing and transitional housing for the last 6 years since I have been on the city council. And so, you know, that's why I think the regional approach is so important, because it's a systemic approach. It's an overarching way to look at our entire system of how people move through our King County and how people experience homelessness. And then the last thing I'll say is that for me, it's really important to listen and to learn from those who have lived the experience of homelessness. And that's part of the reason why now, as a council member, I meet regularly with members of the Lived Experience Coalition to be able to benefit from their experience of where the system failures are and how we can best address the needs of people experiencing homelessness with urgency and with things that work, but also with compassion.
You just mentioned the regional approach, which seems like something that our current mayor has put a lot of faith into, but from an mildly informed outsider's perspective, seems to be getting off to a very, very slow start. And at the same time, we've seen neighboring cities seemingly work in the opposite direction, passing laws that seem like punishing people who are homeless and limiting the ability to cite services in their community. How do you feel like we can mitigate that or work together regionally?
Well, I'll just start off by saying that I think that the passage of laws outside of the city of Seattle that effectively penalize and criminalize people for being poor and unhoused are just absolutely wrong. And it's the wrong policy and it's the wrong choice. And I will never support those kinds of approaches in our own city, because they are insidious laws that are designed to just create additional trauma. I think in terms of the regional approach, you're right. It's been off to a bumpy start, but I still think we need to remain committed to the approach now that we have a CEO in place and now that there is hiring occurring. I do continue to think that just based on what we know about how people move throughout the region who are experiencing homelessness, a regional approach makes sense because it gives people additional choice to be reunited with their family, for example. Sometimes folks come from these suburban cities because this is where the services are at. And if we make services available to folks in the communities that they currently live in, then I think we will all be better served, including and especially those who are experiencing homelessness. I'll tell you, this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy work. It's going to take the mayor and the King County executive and other elected leaders to be willing to push back and to hold the line with these suburban cities who are expecting to receive investments and benefits from investments that are primarily being funded by the King County and by the city of Seattle and not by those suburban cities. And it's going to be up to us to make sure that there are consequences, both political and policy-wise, for those municipalities who are choosing punitive measures as opposed to data-driven, human-centered, trauma-informed approaches. If they intend to participate in the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, which I hope that most of them will continue to do, then they have to continue. Then they will have to be held accountable to our principles and our values, and it's going to take real political leadership to hold the line with those suburban cities to make sure that we don't have any slippage.
Great, thank you. Pivoting to transportation, SDOT is a very big agency with lots of responsibilities and lots of constituencies all asking for more funding. You mentioned the housing levy. Well, if elected, the nearly $1 billion Move Seattle transportation levy would also be expiring during your term. How would you prioritize spending within the agency, and what would you hope to see in a possible successor to the Move Seattle levy?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. I think for me, I'll just say that my leadership style has always been one of consultation. In other words, I don't ever presume that I'm the smartest person in the room and that I'm the only one who knows what the right answer is. So I will tell you what values I would lead with. I think that again, if we're going to build a city that is truly a city that you can get to anything that you need to get to within 15 minutes walking, then I think our moves, our next reiteration or sort of re-envisioning of the Move Seattle levy and our transportation dollars within the Seattle Department of Transportation need to be aligned with that value. So for me, that means, completing the pedestrian master plan, completing the bicycle master plan, making sure that we are actually building protected, separated modes of transportation for those users who are most vulnerable to death and serious injury from single occupancy vehicles. And for me, ultimately what I hope we can accomplish is also having, pedestrianized streets. COVID has shown us that we could do this and that things will not fall apart if we shut down streets and take away parking for single occupancy vehicles. We did that with our street cafe permits. I was proud to be a sponsor of the recent, legislation with Councilmember Strauss that made our cafe streets permitting permanent in the city of Seattle beyond COVID. And I think that making sure that we keep our keep moving streets and our stay healthy streets and sort of figure out how to make those permanent and safe is absolutely something that I think SDOT needs to be prioritizing, and that I would ask them to continue to prioritize. And the last thing I'll just say on this, because I really like this question, is I had an opportunity to, and I think I've talked to some of you about this in the past, is in 2019, I had an opportunity to go on a study mission to Copenhagen. And I spent, a week and a half there really digging into what it means to reclaim the public realm for public use. In other words, not for single occupancy vehicles, but for people. So I think that's the kind of Department of Transportation we need to have, is not one that ignores the fact that people use single occupancy vehicle and cars to move around, but one that understands that we're building our transportation system for people, not for machines, is a value that I would put at the front and center and ask the leader of SDOT to rely on to shape the vision and the proposal that I would be asked to consider.
Great. So you've been mentioning pedestrians. One of the biggest, I think, gaps in the Seattle transportation system might be that many of our, especially north and south neighborhoods where more low-income and BIPOC community members live, lack sidewalks, which seems like the most fundamental, mode of transportation right there. Do you have a vision for how we can bring sidewalks to every street in Seattle? I know some people have done the math and it adds up to, it'd be like the whole Loop Move Seattle levy.
Yeah, it's very expensive if you, when you start taking into account our ADA accessibility requirements, and that all becomes very, very expensive. So I think that the solution is a little bit more nuanced. One is I think a lot of the estimates that I have seen have assumed a certain type of sidewalk. So just from an infrastructure perspective, they've assumed sort of the most expensive version of a sidewalk. The things you learn when you've been in local government for as long as I have are as nuanced as knowing and learning that not all sidewalks are made equal. And so I think I'll just start with that, saying that, sort of thinking about what model, if you will, of a sidewalk needs to be built where is, it could lower the cost of building sidewalks throughout the city. The second thing I would say is that there are areas in our city where I think it's just too dangerous for people to be walking even if there is a sidewalk. And so I would like us to sort of be a little bit more focused on the areas that we know are naturally greenways, or are areas of a lot of pedestrian traffic because people use that route to go to school or to go to the grocery store or to walk to a park. And then I think that there are other areas where we have data about pedestrian injuries and deaths, and I think those areas need to be prioritized for safer infrastructure in the area to make sure that we are staying true to our commitment around Vision Zero. And so I think if we sort of prioritize in that way and have tiers of priorities, then we eventually can get to a place where every neighborhood and every street has safe ADA compliant sidewalks. But I think it's not a matter of whether or not, it's a matter of sort of how do we do it and what's the right sequencing of how we execute sidewalks throughout the city in a way that is really going to fulfill our commitment to Vision Zero.
Great, thank you. Seattle's grown, as we've discussed, really fast in the last couple of years, and we just read last year it was the fastest growing big city in America. And one thing that's become clear is that our mass transit system's not as robust as it needs to be. And as you know, as a West Seattle resident, Ballard and West Seattle Link are a long way out, and it seems like possibly getting farther. How can we speed up the delivery of transit, and how do we pay for that?
That's a tough question. I had an opportunity to participate in the elected leadership group that looked at the ST3 alignment proposals, and so much of those decisions are just fueled by cost and the design cost in particular. And I think that's important for the future mayor of the city to really stay focused on who we're building this infrastructure for and for how long, right? And so if we really want to build infrastructure that's going to last 100 years or more, then we need to make the tough decisions now about those designs that may come with additional costs, but in a cost benefit analysis, those things will pay off. I mean, there's an opportunity to leverage, in particular for me, my relationship with our congressional delegation, folks like Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who's a good friend of mine and a supporter, and working with our federal partners to identify federal monies that could be used to supplement additional transit, public transit infrastructure investments throughout the city. So, I don't have the perfect answer for this question, because I think funding is always difficult. I do think that I would have a hard time supporting anything that wasn't a progressive revenue taxation option. And I would be, sort of a strong believer in wanting to work closely with federal and state partners around identifying additional dollars to supplement the design costs of a system that is truly going to meet our needs for the next 100 years.
Thank you. Do you see the Central City Connector as playing a role in our future transportation infrastructure?
I have voted in favor of the Center City Connector more times than probably any other sitting council member currently. So yes, I do. I think for me as a citywide council member and as somebody who's running for mayor, I think it is important to follow through on the commitment that we made to many of the immigrant and refugee owned, BIPOC owned businesses in Chinatown International District and Little Saigon, who really felt like the city did them wrong when they built the First Hill streetcar, and they conceded to certain things on the promise that the city was going to connect the First Hill streetcar to the rest of the downtown core to promote, their local economy and to make sure that they were able to move people who recreate and live and work in the CID. And so for me, I think it's really important to fulfill that promise, and that's been sort of my greatest motivator in continuing to vote in favor of advancing that project.
That's a really interesting backstory that I don't know if I was fully aware of. So that's good to hear. So we got multiple questions about this in RSVPs. People who brought up the idea of a gondola to West Seattle instead of light rail because of the costs. Do you have any thoughts on that proposal?
I don't know if it's feasible or not. I think I always have an open mind for creative ideas. The gondola it's not the first time this idea has been floated. It's above the washer and dryer. Yeah, sorry, baby needs a diaper change. So I think the reality is that it really is based on like feasibility, and really at the end of the day, how much is, how many people is that kind of proposed mode of transportation really capable of moving, and is it really actually going to meet the needs of the nearly currently 100,000 people who use that bridge on a daily basis, right? If we're building a gondola, it's only going to move about 100 or 1,000 or 2,000 people. That's not going to address our traffic congestion issues that are coming from the West Seattle area currently. And so I think that's sort of my early perspective on that idea.
Okay, great. Like I said, I want to try to get you out of here a little early so you can get back to recovery, but I do have a couple more questions I want to sneak in. And pivoting a little bit, many people have called for a 50% cut to the police. People want an alternative so that if they call 911, the only option for response is not just an armed police officer. What specifically do you think our re-envisioned public safety system should look like in our city?
Well, I mean, I think, I continue to stand by the very difficult votes that I and my colleagues on the city council took over the summer. They were challenging conversations, but I think it was important to effectuate at least a partial down payment, if you will, or commitment of close to 20% of budget reductions, including transfers out of the police department. I think it's really important to continue to invest in community safety initiatives like we did over the summer. So, investing in organizations like Choose 180 and Community Passageways and, a myriad of other community-based organizations out in South Seattle and in other parts of the city. They really do focus on violence interruption, but also on upstream solutions, are just critical to actually producing equitable community safety. So that investment in BIPOC community safety initiatives is absolutely important to reimagining public safety and sort of who we expect to deliver on public safety for our communities. The second piece is, continuing to demilitarize our police department. So when they do show up for a protest, they don't look like they are occupying our neighborhoods. Now, we've tried to do that through passage of our less lethal weapons ordinance, which has been the subject of a lot of criticism and review by the federal court judge. But I continue to believe that putting restrictions in place that prevent the densest neighborhood in the state from appearing to be a war zone night after night after night is the right policy choice for the city. So I'm going to continue to work with my colleagues on making sure that we are looking at policies like that, and that we're working with the state to also set a minimum standard for all police departments as it relates to demilitarization and to accountability. And then, you know, the police negotiations are going to be critically important. That's something that I'm currently steeped in and have been steeped in since I was elected in 2015 to the city council. And you know, I have been a civil rights attorney in this state for, oh my gosh, longer than I'd like to admit, since 2005. And my entire legal career has been focused on holding police accountable. I have sued police departments, small and large, including the city of Seattle, for police misconduct, brutality, and racial bias. And I have always prioritized the civil rights and the civil liberties and the justice and fairness of people in our city who are subjected to police brutality. And so I will bring those values to the role that the mayor plays in negotiating the next labor contract with SPOG. And it's going to be a tough battle, and it's going to be really challenging, and it may require litigation. And we need a mayor who's willing to take it all the way to be able to do that. And I'm willing to do that with the support of impacted community members.
Great. I think maybe we can get one more on community safety and then let you go. One of your roles, if you're elected, will be finding a new police chief. What will you be looking for, and what do you think your process will be like?
Well, the process is largely designed by the charter, not to be wonky about it, but that's sort of what tells you sort of what the basic process is. I think in the past there have been search committees that are, you know, largely diverse, who help to look at the candidate pool and who, you know, sort of whittle it down and give some recommendations to the mayor. So I expect that that'll be a similar process here. But what I'll say is what I will be looking for is somebody who is not just committed to reform. We hear a lot about reform. I think reform is really important. I have been committed to reform since 2005 when I first became a civil rights attorney. I've served on blue ribbon panels reviewing, you know, the Seattle Police Department's accountability system. And I will continue to advocate for strong reform and accountability by our Office of Police Accountability and our IG and the CPC as well. But I think that, but now it's just, that is the bare minimum in my mind, committing to reform. And what we need is a chief of police who is going to be committed to disrupting the status quo of how law enforcement business has been done since the beginning of time in this country, including the city of Seattle. And that means being willing to, you know, follow through on recommendations like the one that our Office of Inspector General just recommended around no longer enforcing traffic laws, because it has an inherent disproportionate impact on people of color and result in interactions that then lead to deadly use of force or unnecessary use of force. Now, if we had a chief in place who embraced those recommendations as opposed to played defense because they didn't want to lose a line of business, then I think our city would be better served and we would all be safer as a result of a leader, of a chief of police who approaches those recommendations with that strong set of values, to not be committed to the status quo, but to be there, to work hand in hand with community and to work hand in hand with me as the mayor on what it means to transform the police department by being willing to advocate for and work with me to reduce the amount of functions that the police department currently does, with the acknowledgement that there are other systems that are more appropriately designed to meet those needs in our community, like mental health crisis and people who are using, you know, who have substance use disorders, etc.
Great. Well, the one last question I have is, if people tonight heard what you said and said, I'm all in on Team Gonzalez, how do they get involved? What can they do to help you in your campaign?
Well, we have a field director, Vanya. She's on the Zoom call here. She would be happy to drop the link in the chat about how you can volunteer. And we're just out. We're doing texting. We're doing canvassing, and we are talking to voters every single day. So if you want to join us in this grassroots campaign that we're building, we invite you to do that. So obviously democracy vouchers is another way to support, to make sure that we can get the word out about our campaign. That is also a really important way to help us continue our momentum on this campaign.
Great. With that, thank you so much for joining us tonight, even though you're sick and I know you're so busy as well. We really appreciate your time, and I appreciate everyone who was able to join and listen. It's a beautiful day out, and it's wonderful that you took the time to learn more involved with the future of our city. And I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. There was lots of good ones. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
well.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
And the video will be up, folks, if you want to share it with anyone who is interested.